We have Justin Meyer here with Midwest Mealworm. Notice the fit? Midwest Mealworm.
Yeah.
There you go. We're samies. We're like mealworm bros. This is actually when I wear this for like a week at a time, and my wife takes this to say, Wally, I have to wash it. Every day, I'm like, where's my sweatshirt? Now it's 88 degrees outside, and I'm
Yeah.
wearing a sweatshirt, so that shows my dedication to
I love it.
Midwest Mealworms.
I love it.
I've known Justin for some time, and I've gone back to Justin many, many times for questions about mealworms. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to share a lot of the information that Justin has compiled over the years with Midwest mealworms. And we're going to dig down into the care and actually into the, hey, I've purchased some mealworms. Now, what do I do with them once they arrive at my home? How do I prepare them before feeding them to my reptiles? And hopefully, I can share little tidbits related to the reptile world. But Justin is going to dig down deep into the mealworms. This is going to be a great show. Again, known Justin for a long, long time. A couple of things that I can talk about Justin about is that he is dedicated to many things. Number one, the mealworms themselves. So understanding all about mealworms, he's dedicated to the process, improving the process, finding flaws, finding ways to improve. Lean manufacturing. Oh my gosh, that's a term that I go back years and years back on. And he's dedicated on education. So please go out there and subscribe and like and do all that stuff with Midwest Mealworms, because Justin puts out videos all the time on mealworm care and shows his facility. If nothing else, it gives you that sense of what a big time breeder really does, so that you can incorporate that into your care of mealworms as well. And finally, Justin has donated to the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. If you don't know that, check the video description for the link. Many years. Justin, thank you very much for your dedication. Thank you very much for the 12 Supreme Days of Christmas. Can't thank you enough for joining us today and talking about mealworms and getting down into the details.
My pleasure, sir. Happy to be here.
So let's start off with, give us a little bit of a elevator speech on who Justin is, what Midwest Mealworms really is.
Okay. Midwest Mealworms is the culmination of a lot of crazy events. So not to go back too far, but I started Midwest Mealworms back in January of 2017 as a side gig. I started raising mealworms for chickens we had at the time, looking for alternative options for them from a feed perspective. And it went from a 3-drawer system in a closet a little bit off to my right here into the facility that I'm in now, 2,100 square foot building dedicated almost exclusively to mealworms. It's been a long trial and error process to get there. And what the goal of Midwest Mealworms is to sell live feeders, live mealworms, while running a business within capitalism that doesn't get too tech heavy. The original goal was to be able to do something everyone can do. In the last 6 to 12 months, I've started to kind of question, is this something anyone can do? But up until that point, I think that feasibly a lot of people can raise these mealworms, even at a very micro scale, as long as we're doing the right things and taking proper precautions, and even scale that up to supply folks around them as well. And so the goal of Midwest Mealworms was originally to get feeders for myself selfishly, produced way more than I needed, found out other people needed them, and started selling those. And what I found is that there's not a lot of information, at the time anyway, for people raising mealworms and running a business. People didn't share a lot of what they were doing right. There's a lot of reasons why that happened. But I decided to go ahead and just start sharing everything. So that's where the YouTube channel came from, Facebook, TikTok, different social medias, and basically just kind of sharing and exposing what I was doing and how I was doing it. And what I got back from that was amazing. People would reply with questions that would challenge what I was doing. People would supply answers to things that I was running into that was problematic. They would educate me about, well, I need this for my reptile, or wouldn't it be better for, that sort of thing. It was like having another team, right? Having a resource of people.
Yeah.
And so by sharing and exposing what I did, sure, you could stand up your own mealworm farm, but who's crazy enough to want to do that, right? This guy is. And so sharing that information, was a way to expose what I was doing and hopefully help other people do it as well. Because my goal is not to become the mealworm person, the only mealworm farm in the U.S. I have zero desire to do that. Once we hit max capacity here in the building, and everything is lean, as you mentioned, that is a throwback term there. Then there'll be another challenge, another thing. I don't intend to expand and get bigger and bigger. So,
Well, that eliminated about four of my follow-up questions, but
but you should
that
still ask them because they might be helpful.
perfect answer. And that brings up a really good point too. That I have 2 points. I'm going to bring up the first is that, from an education standpoint, I appreciate, and I hope other people appreciate this too. When I watch your TikTok videos, a lot of times, I don't want to say a majority, but a lot of times you're answering questions that other business people might look at and say, why are you questioning what I'm doing? You're looking at those questions and you're saying, here's why. Here's why. Or you're looking at them. I would say sometimes the way I look at them and say, well, why am I doing it that way?
Right.
And then you answer it that way as well. So I appreciate your honesty and I appreciate your forthcoming as far as answering those questions. And if anybody has questions here, message Justin.
Yep.
Don't message me. I won't answer them. Message Justin and ask him your mealworm questions. And I see that all the time on TikTok. Here's my other point. I raise mealworms too. I have probably 4 or 5 or 6 drawers of mealworms, but yet I'm ordering 40,000, 50,000 mealworms a month. Well, why am I ordering when I'm raising them? Because I don't want to spend 1,000 hours raising mealworms. I'm not
Right.
proficient at that. That's not my skill. That's not my,
It's
my
not your
skill is
passion, right? It's not your passion.
right. Exactly. That's not. Mine is actually with the geckos. So I want to have those spare setups going just in case the middle of summer, the middle
Right.
of winter, I can't get mealworms. I can go to my supply and I can pull from there. So we're going to talk about bringing in mealworms and how to care for them. Like I said earlier, we're going to talk a little bit about raising mealworms as well in this episode. So I hope that that's beneficial to both, people that are bringing them in, buying mealworms, hopefully from Midwest Mealworms, and also raising them themselves or doing both.
Mhm.
Give us a little bit of a perspective. Give us a perspective of Midwest Mealworms. You talked about, did I hear 2,100 square feet facility? How many trays is that? How many, I've seen your videos and it's like, oh my gosh, there's more rooms here. This is crazy stuff. How many trays? Do you know a number of how many mealworms you're raising or shipping out a month, or kind of give us a perspective if you
Sure.
could?
Yeah. So in a 2,100 square foot building, right now I've got approximately 3,000 trays, and those trays are in various different stages. So we have a bulk of those are probably in the grow out stage where the eggs are sitting in the tray or the eggs are hatching and the larvae are growing. And that takes approximately 2 to 3 months in optimal conditions to get to the point where they hatch and then are collected and then available. We've got the breeding trays, which have all the beetles in them. We've got pupation trays. And then we just have dirty trays and clean trays. So we've got to have trays ready for things that need to happen in the week, and we've got dirty trays that need to be cleaned and washed. And so there's 3,000 of those roughly in various different stages. And the trays that I use are the Beacon Camp 6206. So I get asked that question all the time, what trays do you use? It took me a long time to find those, oddly enough. And so I've got a video on my YouTube channel of various different tray options I went through before I found Beacon Camp trays. And so the reason I can get 3,000 trays in there is because of those. They stack vertically, they're very stable. And vertical is the goal for insect rearing because it allows you to optimize the space that you have. So we've got a whole boatload of trays in there, but we also have space reserved for the processing part, right? So I have a mealworm sifting machine, I have a pupa sifting machine, I have a table with all of our supplies for packaging, processing, doing things like that. I have an office, and then I have a front area that's not part of the HVAC area or the environmentally controlled, right? Because mealworms need to be temperature and humidity controlled for optimal production. So the front area is where we freeze all of our bran in order to avoid pest insects. It's a storage area for the dirty trays, and I have a cooler up there. So that's actually the newest addition is the cooler from Coolbot. And so that space is really maximized at this point. There is a couple more things that are in the works that will potentially allow me to get more trays in there, believe it or not. But that's going to take probably 6 to 9 months to test, validate, and really make sure that it's not negatively impacting mealworm availability. So within that building, like that took, I've been in that building for 3.5 years. When I first started, I think I only had about 1,000 trays in there. And so that growth over those 3 years was really just tinkering and trying to figure out tray management and how to maximize that area. Definitely don't start there because all of the things that I did are a result of what works for us now that I have some teammates in there. Originally, it was what worked for me, right? So I'm a big guy. I'm 6'3". I have a huge wingspan. I can reach up to a stack of trays that are 20 trays tall. The other folks that work for me can't do that. So I've had to change things a little bit, right? You just adjust to the scenarios that are happening and the goals that you have.
Everybody has to change now that I'm getting older. It's not the height that bothers me as much as the lower levels and trying
Yep.
to bend
Yep.
down. So I've adjusted our setups accordingly as well.
Right.
So everybody has to adjust. But more importantly, everybody's environment is different. So there's
Yeah.
adjustments to do there.
And
Humid environments.
that is a super key thing. Like from a mealworm rearing perspective, I get asked all the time, what size tray should I use? How many larvae should I put in there? How many beetles should I have? What production can I get? Right? And I love answering questions, but what I've found from the past is when I answer those questions with my information, right? Like I'll tell you what I produce. I'll tell you how many beetles. I put 2,500 beetles into a 60 centimeter by 40 centimeter tray, right? Like I'll share this information. That doesn't bother me. But the problem is that my environment and my care for those insects is not yours, right? And so I hydrate 3 times a week very strictly. Like I do that because that's optimal. I could do more, I could do less. You may not have time to do that. And that's going to affect that 2,500 beetle count. If you don't hydrate them enough, they will cannibalize, they will die off, you will have lower production, right? And so it's very much what are your goals and what kind of resources, including your time and energy, do you have available?
Yes.
You should base your production off of what you can achieve, not what I can do. Like this is what I do, right? Like I'm raising mealworms. It is now my full-time gig. Not that you can't be as efficient and productive as me, but don't set your expectation that you're going to get that. Start where you're at and see what you can achieve.
Yes, but I'll throw in this. I don't watch your videos to say, I want to be Justin. I want to produce 1 bazillion mealworms every month. I don't do that. I don't watch, I don't know, cricket farm videos to say, I want to produce a bazillion crickets. I watch your videos to see how you're doing your process so that maybe I can figure out, oh, he's hydrating this way. And we're going to talk about your method of hydrating in
Okay.
just a second.
Yep.
But I watch your videos to get an understanding of maybe the best, I'm trying to work around my mic here, the best ways to do this whole process. Again, we're talking about process. And I tell you what, viewers, this might be the most important point here is that, don't look at videos, don't read Facebook and say, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not doing it at that scale.
Hmm.
Watch, read, learn, research, and understand so that you can do the best. Take little pieces away from that and do the best
Yep.
that you can.
Yep.
Mealworms. I'm gonna jump back about 20 steps here,
Okay.
something that I should have said in the very beginning. Why mealworms? Why not crickets? Um, why not Justin, why not geckos? Why didn't you start raising geckos? That's fun. That's the fun part. Um, Seriously though, why mealworms? And give us some benefits of mealworms if you can over some of the other feeder foods. I know I am a huge mealworm believer, and there's many different reasons. And I know in the hobby, some people frown upon mealworms because of the chitin,
Yep.
um, but boy, oh boy, reptiles eat insects in the wild, and they eat hard-shelled insects, and that's a benefit sometimes to some reptiles. So, anyways, tell us why mealworms.
Why mealworms? So let's start from a perspective of a reptile keeper or a reptile person, right? From my experience, mealworms are far easier to care for and make mistakes with. And what I mean
Yes.
by that is, and just allow flexibility. So, let's say you need to go on vacation for a week. You can hydrate those mealworms and walk away for a week and come back, and they're going to be okay, right? Mealworms do really well from a shipping perspective. So in those moments where Wally, oh shoot, I had a problem, or I went on vacation for 2 weeks and I need to get these mealworms back in shape with some feed and some hydration, I'll order some. Mealworms are pretty forgiving, but they're also very hardy. And so, from a shipping perspective, you're going to have less issues in general. And then, from a rearing perspective, they're very forgiving, right? You can make some mistakes and not lose your entire colony. They are pretty hardy from a pathogen biology perspective. So my experience with superworms, I raised those for several years, and it drove me insane because they are so much more susceptible to diseases. And
Yeah.
once they get one, the whole colony is gone, right? Mealworms don't have that issue. They will have, some die off and some problems, but they are meant to be raised in dense conditions.
Yes.
And so they're very I wouldn't say easy, but they're far less risky from a small perspective, in the sense that if something were to happen in that farm, and a few trays had, let's say, a mold issue. That's a good one that comes up sometimes. A few of those trays get overhydrated and they get moldy. Those trays can go, but it's not going to spread everywhere and impact the entire colony. So from a business or from a rearing perspective, for somebody that's doing this on a small scale, mealworms are just easier. I did crickets when I was a kid. Crickets stink. They smell bad. The shelf life is low, right? So once you get to the point where you have crickets, you got to use them, right? And mealworms are far easier if you cool them down. They'll stay in that larval stage for longer, so that you can, from a sales perspective here, you could buy more from me and save money and throw those things in the fridge. And one, you don't have to continue to get shipments every week or mess around with that. You can store them, you can use them when you need to. And so it's just a better insect from that perspective and from my very biased perspective. Um, the personal reason for mealworms is that my brain constantly needs challenges and input to get the dopamine hit, to get the fun, to get the goodness. And what I found with mealworms is that every stage I've been at, it has constantly been here's something I can adjust and improve or do differently. Even now in the building that we're in, with the 2,100 square feet and all those trays, there are things that I can do better to not only increase production, but decrease the energy load required from me. So that as I get older and things down lower or up higher aren't as easily gettable, I can adapt to that by just adjusting and learning and changing things. And so it's been a constant and very consistent challenge to my brain to keep me interested. I've had multiple hobbies. I'm 42 now. I've had multiple hobbies across all these years. I've made my own solar panels. I tried earthworms in a tub in an apartment I was living in. I've done all sorts of crazy things, and none of them stuck. Mealworms stuck with me. They fit my personality, and have allowed me to do a lot of good stuff. So that's why mealworms from a personal perspective.
I love the feedback there, especially from the process standpoint, where you're always looking, I think that that's how your mind works, is that
Yep.
you're always looking for improvements, and it gives you that challenge. Crickets get loose. I'm getting my cup of crickets to feed, and I three or four are on the floor,
Yeah, mealworms
and
don't stop. So
right. And two nights later, somewhere in the walls are crickets chirping, keeping me up, all
right.
hours of the night. So obviously, there's huge benefits to mealworms. I use the mealworm cups, and I tell you what, folks, if you're feeding and you're not using mealworm cups, even for crickets, but especially for mealworms and dubias, you've got to look at those mealworm cups. But anyways, I think, if everybody looks at the nutritional charts as well, you'll find mealworms are right there as far as protein and the other nutrients, just like the other. And obviously, black soldier fly are going to be higher in calcium. I'm a
Yes.
big believer, and I'm kind of taking a turn here away from the interview. I apologize, Justin, but for our reptile fans, I'm a big believer that you don't gut load insects to pass that on to your reptiles, but the key component of this whole process is supplementation and dusting your insects. So once you look at levels and you say, oh, this one's 19% more protein, or 19% protein, and this one's 17, if you're dusting, that minimizes that difference 1,000%. What's interesting is that mealworms are starting to become more and more popular from a not reptile food source
Hmm.
uh, perspective, right?
Correct. Yep. So mealworms are also real good for wild bird feeding. So wild birds are out there eating insects all the time, and folks will purchase mealworms from me in order to feed to their wild birds. And then from a human food perspective, outside the U.S., it's very prevalent. Maybe we'll get there someday. We'll see. I have no benefit to producing mealworms that could be used for food. So this is not a biased, like let's get mealworms in your food perspective. I would go bankrupt if that was the only way I could sell mealworms was for human grade food. But the mealworm is just super good from a nutrient perspective. And so there are a lot of products out there already, especially over in Europe, where they're integrating it into pet food. So dog and cat food are now benefiting from the nutrient profile of mealworms. And mealworms are real good at just consuming, right? And so from a dried grain perspective, they're just great at eating that stuff. So like spent brewer grains, instead of those being loaded and taken to a landfill, you could drop those into an insect farm and go ahead and consume those, right? And then those insects and these mealworms will turn those into usable nutrients for reptiles, poultry, wild birds, etc. So it's a good way to, the circle that everybody wants to happen. Insects are going to be a vital part of that to make it happen.
Outstanding. I can see your I can see Midwest Mealworms going like 4 stories tall just to start doing, human consumption mealworm foods. That would be so cool. I
I,
think that that's
I
something
don't
that
know
you
if
have
I
to
want to
write in
get
your
that.
goals.
I don't know if I want to get that big though.
Right.
The next challenge is actually a soldier fly. So I've posted a few videos about that. I haven't talked about it a lot because I'm experimenting, but I've started raising soldier fly to keep the brain busy, but also to accomplish some of those circular goals that mealworms aren't 100% good at. They're good at what they do, but from a food waste consumption perspective, they'll eat food waste, but not very fast. And so, one of the things that I'm tinkering with is soldier fly to play around with that food waste perspective.
Love your soldier fly. I ordered some soldier fly from you the last
Yeah.
time. They came in very clean. They came in fat. Um, Animals love them.
Yep.
Absolutely love them.
Yep.
Another benefit of mealworms, I can't not talk about this, is fishing. You know, I'm sure that you sell to local places that then
Mhm.
sell to fishermen.
Yes.
Huge benefit of mealworms.
I will put a caveat on that. So mine aren't as good for fishermen, and I've personally experienced this because I went and tried it. So my farm is chemical free in the sense that in order to get the larger
Oh,
mealworms that don't pupate, you need to apply a hormone. It's a naturally occurring hormone, right? So again, I'm not gonna make your decision for you, but
right.
the natural hormone is applied in a very large amount. And what that does is it essentially stops the larva from being able to pupate, so they just continue to grow. And that's how you get the giant mealworms or the larger mealworms. And honestly, the ones that are easier to put on a hook, right? Like when I try to put even one of my large mealworms on a hook, it's not fun, right? And so I completely understand it. But I don't sell the large ones. And so the feedback I've received from folks that have used them for bait is these are smaller than is usable for me. And so I have some folks that use them for bait, but I don't go after those types of accounts or whatnot because it's just not a good fit. Their customers are going to come back and say these aren't big enough, and it makes sense because they're really not. Like it's difficult to put my mealworms on a hook, but the fish do love them.
So, musky fishermen, this is a note for you. Don't go to Midwest Mealworms to buy your
Right.
mealworms because they're going to be a little bit smaller than some other companies. But bluegill fishermen, oh my gosh,
Oh yeah,
this is
pan
perfect for you
panfish.
guys.
Yeah, panfish would work well,
Yes,
and that's what I used them for was for pan fishing was to get some bluegill. So yeah,
yes, perfect. Um, let's get into some depth with mealworms. Let's talk about their life cycle. And I
okay.
don't think that there's anybody around that can talk through this whole process better than you. I recently did a video and I showed pictures and I kind of talked through the process a little bit, but oh my gosh, you're experiencing this every single day. And you know, we've talked about that life cycle a little bit in this recording so far, but let's really get into the depth of this beetle, egg beetle, egg, pupa, beetle, larvae
There you go.
process, please. Thank you.
You got it. You got it. So we'll start with the beetle.
Yes.
Beetle or egg? Where should we start? We'll start with the beetle. So the beetle, there are thousands of darkling beetles, and so that's what a Tenebrio molitor, that's what a mealworm beetle is. It's a darkling beetle, and that beetle will party hard. They'll mate. They'll lay eggs. And so, generally, a female is going to lay approximately 500 eggs in a optimal scenario. And so that female lays those eggs over the course of her lifespan. And what'll happen is in the first week or two, it'll start to ramp up. It'll really hit peak in the next 2 to 4 to 6 weeks, and then it'll start to taper off. And so the output of eggs is really dependent on environment, rearing conditions, et cetera. So the numbers I'm talking through are what I'm experiencing with 80 degrees Fahrenheit year round, 50% humidity year round, hydration 3 to 4 times a week, constant access to feed. And so that optimal conditions, right? Good, healthy conditions for beetles. And what that female will do is they'll raise or lay their eggs, increase, and then they'll decrease. And what I found is after about 3 months, they've laid 90 to 95% of their eggs. And so at that point, it's kind of like an egg laying chicken. Once they get old from a farm production perspective, they're not fitting the bill anymore, right? And so at 3 months old, we'll take those beetles and we'll remove them from the colony and replace them with fresh ones. But those
Wow.
females are going to lay those eggs. Those eggs will sit in the bran or on the bottom of the tray, and they'll just kind of hang out. So beetles will cannibalize their own eggs. So that's from a hydration perspective. If you start to slack on that, you'll see lower production because they will cannibalize those eggs as a moisture source. But those eggs are going to sit for about a week to 10 days, so 7 to 10 days, and they'll start hatching. And when they hatch, they are extremely small. One of the things I consistently hear from people is, I've got beetles. I feel like there's eggs in there, but I'm just not seeing it. Something's wrong. What's wrong? And usually, what my default answer at that point is, wait another 2 weeks. be patient and wait another 2 weeks. And most of the time, like right when you start to feel that panic, is give it another 2 weeks and you'll start seeing them because they are extremely tiny.
I actually don't look for baby mealworms. Obviously I have a lot of micro geckos that are this big that
Mhm.
need a mealworm. Let's see if I can do this right. That small.
Small.
So I don't look for micro mealworms right away. I don't feed for about 2 to 3 weeks because they're sitting in bran. Just this is a reptile keeper kind of tip.
Yep.
I start looking for the frass, not the frass. I'm sorry, the skin, the sheds. So I start looking for sheds, and once I start seeing sheds, then I'll start putting in potatoes. And then if I have, animals that have to have that teeny, 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 tiny mealworm, I'll take those potatoes, just scrape off the teeny,
Yep.
tiny mealworms into a dish to feed.
Right. Yeah. Don't try to sift or separate those because those small larvae are just going to go through your sifter, right? And that's a perfect segue into so the egg hatches and those larvae are going to start eating and they're going to start growing. And when they grow, they shed those exoskeletons, right? So that's what you're seeing on the top there. They kind of go up to the top of the substrate. And so those sheds are, if you're familiar with cicadas, so every few years we always see the cicadas, you see the exoskeletons on the trees. Same thing for the mealworm. All insects go through that. They shed that exoskeleton. And when they do, that new outer exoskeleton or skin is going to be white. You don't have albino mealworms. What you have is a mealworm that just grew, right? And so it'll harden up over the next few days. Usually it gets back to that golden amber color. They'll continue eating and consuming, and then they'll do that again. And depending on your environment conditions, the density of those larvae, and how you're taking care of them, they'll go through 15 to 20 on average instars. And an instar is one of those growths, right, where they shed that exoskeleton and get bigger. And so they're just doing that constantly. They're just eating and consuming. They're pooping. That's where the frass comes from. And they do that over the course of several months until they get to that point where they're pretty big, right? And so 3/4 of an inch to an inch is what I would consider to be a large mealworm. And so at that point, with the right scenario, and we can go through what that is, but at that point they'll turn into what's called a pupa. And so a pupa is, again, lots of insects have a pupal stage. A lot of folks are familiar with caterpillars. We talk about that in school a lot. You've got the caterpillar, it goes into its chrysalis, and then emerges as a butterfly. Similar for mealworms. They're going to start as that larva. They turn into that pupa, which kind of looks like an alien scenario. Its tail will wiggle, like it's still alive in there, but it's not mobile anymore. It's not moving around, and it just sits. And so it'll stay there for about 7 to 14 days, and then it'll emerge. The beetle will emerge out of that. And similar to the larva, whenever the larva shed their exoskeleton, they're white. When that beetle emerges, at first it's white. You don't have an albino beetle. Be patient and wait. It'll emerge as white. It'll start to transition. It'll go through different hues of red, different hues of brown, and then ultimately end up at black. Once it's black, it is now reproducible. It's going to go around and party hard and mate, lay those eggs, and start that process all over again.
Perfect. We're going to talk a little bit later about sorting and cleaning,
Okay.
but carrying this through, we've got the beetles that are ready to lay eggs. How do you keep those beetles? You just keep them over bran, wheat bran, and
Yep.
let them do their thing. Do you do like egg cartons? Do you do, any other kind of items in there to help them or keep them away from the eggs?
The only thing I do right now is add the wheat bran in, and then try to keep them in dark as much as possible. That's difficult because we need light when we're in there. So they still get about 8 to 9 hours of light because we're in there working. But keeping them in a dark place helps kind of keep them moving around and not trying to get away from the light. But I use wheat bran. There's a lot of different options. I found wheat bran from a process perspective and from a what I can get perspective, right? So depending on what you can source locally, oats might be easier. Cornmeal might be the only option you have.
Hmm.
It honestly depends on what you have available, but what I've found is wheat bran works best for me from a process perspective and from a harvesting perspective. And what I mean by that is when I used oatmeal, the flat oats, what I found is that sifting and harvesting was just really difficult. It's really difficult to separate the larva from those oats because the oats don't go through. Bran does. And they also can very easily eat those. They eat the wheat bran flakes. And so the beetles are in with the wheat bran. They'll get hydration 3 times a week from water gel crystals. Again, that's a process thing for me. We'll probably talk about the hydration stuff in a little bit. But other than that, it's nothing special right now. Very simplistic, very straightforward. The downside to the method I use is what I mentioned earlier, where the males will cannibalize the eggs. So because they have access to everything in that tray, the male can go around and, oh, I'm thirsty right now, and Justin hasn't given me anything for a day. I'm going to eat some of these. And so my production is affected by that. Um, but that's okay, right? Like my goal is not to be 100% efficient. It's all right to have some of that and just know that it's there and either adjust for it or improve the process. And so I've started using some mesh inserts into the trays.
Oh, really?
I've experimented with a couple things, and what I found is that by putting the mesh on the substrate, that's the way that it needs to work. So I've seen a lot of people do the method where they elevate, right, where they have maybe a 3 drawer system and the top drawer has mesh on the bottom, and they say, well, the eggs fall through. The eggs aren't falling through. I did a test where I put beetles on just straight mesh, gave them potatoes so that they had something to eat, and there were 0 eggs. Once I put that mesh onto substrate, eggs. And so, from a biology perspective, I'm not a biologist, I'm not an entomologist, I'm just a dude who raises bugs and tinkers. What I found is that those beetles want somewhere safe to put their eggs. And so, what's happening in that elevated or in that drawer scenario is the beetles are laying eggs, the eggs are hatching, and the mealworms are falling through.
Yes.
It's a perfectly good method. It works great. You're not going to get optimal production because the males are going to eat those eggs, but you'll get plenty. And so I've started tinkering with those mesh inserts in an attempt to one improve my process so that it's quicker to do my beetle swap process. I also think it's going to reduce dust in the farm, which is always a good thing because then there's less to clean. Because when I'm swapping that tray and shaking things around, the meshes or the brand's falling down, the frass is falling down. It's just there's kind of a dust storm there that has to be controlled. And so mesh is a good way, in my opinion, especially for a small producer who might be doing it in a drawer next to them by their microphone or in their home. Dust is a concern you want to think about. And so if you
Oh,
can reduce that, the drawer system is actually a good way to reduce the potential dust there for a beetle swap. And so those
well,
beetles
for
hang out in that tray. And with the mesh inserts, it's a pick up the mesh and put it over into another tray. And so right now I'm testing different ways to see what to do with those trays from a density perspective, from a process perspective, and ultimately, do they produce the same amount of mealworms or more from the trays that, in comparison to the trays I'm doing now? Because at the end of the day, I do need to fund the business and stay stable and producing, and so I can't just change something all of a sudden and not do it willy nilly, but change it to the point where I might get less production and impact things in the long term.
let's go ahead and change the process. Oh, 3 months later, that didn't work at all. We didn't get any mealworms or any eggs. That stunk. So we've got to go back. So that kills the business. Good point. Really good point. Um, you made a really good point. And I've got to emphasize this and pointed out that you said you could improve the process, tweak it a little bit to do better, but that's not your goal. Your goal isn't to be 100%. It's to be 80 or 85 or 90 or whatever it is. There's always a cost to get in another 2 or 3 or 4%, and that cost could be money. It could be different materials. It could be your time. So
And
I can
energy. Every
energy,
time, every time I think about a process improvement, I'm one of the things that I factor in, and this is difficult in our environment because of the primary goal is money, right? And so I've got to stay in business, so I need to make sure that I'm funding everything. But I try to look at it from the perspective of what's my energy going to take? What's this going to take from me or give to me, right? Because one of the things that's important to me, and one of the reasons I run the business the way I do, is family is always more important than mealworms. And so I need to have energy at the end of the day and on the weekends in order to do the things that I want to do for the folks around me. And processes are built around that mentality. And
Yes.
so, like, your processes are different for you because your goal is geckos, right? It's all
And I
gecko
don't care
nutrition.
about the family.
Well, now, sir. Right. And so the priorities are also what are driving my processes
Yes.
and my specific things. So always take that into account. But energy level is a big thing for me. And so one of the things that's driving that beetle swap change and the mesh insert is the energy it takes to do those things is going to be less, which opens things up either from, not from a production perspective in order to get bigger and add more floors to the building, but it frees up energy for other things like soldier fly, or when family has issues and I need to step out for a day, I can do that. And so that's one of the big drivers for me.
Love it. Love it. The I've got to cover this point in a little bit more detail here. The mesh that you're
Mhm.
using, is that the white cross stitch? Is, I don't know if that's the right word, but the big, 12 by, or 8 by 11 or whatever size white mesh pieces, that plastic that you can buy at craft stores?
There are a lot of different options.
Okay.
So you could use anything that has an opening big enough for the female to get the ovipositor down through that to lay her egg, but is small enough so that it doesn't allow the beetles to get their heads through in order to eat those eggs. And so I want to say that I'm using metal mesh right now.
Oh, okay.
It is
Okay.
more costly, but from a longevity perspective and rigidity perspective, one of the things I found is that plastic will kind of bend and warp over time, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so with the metal, it stays for the most part. Like, you can always bend it and mess things up, but for the most part, it stays nice and flat, and that ensures that an entire surface is available for egg laying. But from a sourcing perspective, craft stores have that plastic mesh that you're talking about. That would work perfectly fine. I think I've heard from two folks that have tried that method and said, I made this for like $5. Beautiful, right? Like, if you can source that, that'll work. The cloth bags that I actually ship in, the I've got a different type that I'm starting to ship with. Those might actually work. So they're a plastic mesh material. You could cut one of those and attach it to the bottom and see if they'll lay eggs through it. I haven't done that yet because I tend to get myself involved in too many experiments, and so it's on the
Yes.
back burner, right? So if somebody wants to try that and test it out, let me know and I'll make sure you get one of the new bags. But there's a lot of different methods, and that's one of the things that is so fantastic about mealworms is that you can use all sorts of stuff. You don't have to use what I'm using. You can use something you've got sitting around the kitchen. There are folks that use colanders to sift out their larvae from their pupa. It works perfect, right? Like, you don't need a machine like I have. I'm gonna plug somebody if that's all right. I
Yeah,
used
please.
Space Coast Mealworms produced a
Yes.
pupa
Yes.
sifter. So Scott down in Florida, he used to raise mealworms, and then he got affected by the allergies and just decided I'm moving into something else. And so one of the things what he moved into now is he got a laser machine, and he cuts things out, right? He started doing that with his pupa sifters. And so I used a manual pupa sifter for years, just shaking it around before I moved to the machine that we use now. And so there's a lot of different methods for doing what needs to happen with mealworms. And so it's really about kind of looking at, and you've mentioned this, kind of look at what folks are doing and see how can I mimic that or mirror that so it works for me.
Yes.
One tip that I'll throw out there that
Yeah.
is really important: when you want to make a change or improvement, don't stack them. Do one of those things and wait and see based on how long it takes for you to go through. I wait and see for an entire cycle. So, like the beetle mesh that I'm testing, it's going to take me probably 6 months of consistent work and tracking to see how that pans out. And I don't want to change anything else. because there are already so many variants with a live insect that could potentially happen. So when you go to make a change in your insect colony and your rearing style and what you're doing, make that change on as small of a piece of your colony as you're willing to risk losing, and then see how it pans out and adjust from there. Because you'll find it might work really well, but it hurts something else down the line. And so just take some time with it. Mealworms are a good way to get better at being patient, because you just kind of have to wait. They're going to do their own thing, and so be patient and wait and practice that.
Yes. Um, I thought you were going to say don't do it to your whole colony, do it to half of your colony, which is
You're to a
would be
very
great
small.
advice. But the advice that you gave, former life, I was a programmer, and if you had a problem with the program, you didn't go in and say, okay, I think this will change. Oh, by the way, this would make a nice enhancement over here, and they've been asking for this change as well, so I'll make this change over here. So now you just have a muddled soup of
Yep.
changes. And did it fix it? Yes. Well, which change did it not fix it? Well, what didn't fix it? Oh, I've got to start stripping out. Great point, and it seems obvious to me because I learned that 168 years ago in my programming life, to not make more than one change at a time. But great point. Really good point.
I
Love it.
have to throw something out. So my original college degree was in computer science.
Silly boy.
We focused on Ada as the programming language. That's how we learned the fundamentals. Yeah. And my first side gig out of college was building websites. So like background technical work. It's interesting that that's where you came from as well. So pretty cool.
Very cool. And I think that that is probably why we have, very similar mindsets as far as, step by
Right.
step process control and so on. So many other points rather than mealworms in this conversation. This is fantastic.
Yep.
Mealworms. Let's kind of talk about, let's get into the mealworms themselves.
Okay.
You talked about beetles, and if I remember right, 80 degrees, 50% humidity,
Hmm.
as close as you can.
Hmm.
Let's talk about mealworms as far as, um, for you, let's talk about, food, substrate. Let's
Hmm.
talk about temperatures. Let's talk about humidity. Let's talk about hydration.
Okay.
That's going to be the big one.
Yep. So from a substrate perspective, I've tried a lot of different things. And what I found at the beginning is access to wheat bran isn't as financially feasible, and honestly, sometimes isn't even accessible for some people. And what I ran into is when I first started, I didn't need 20 pounds or 20 bags a week of wheat bran. I needed like one for a month. And so it was hard for me at the beginning to find and access wheat bran. And so I was using other things. I was using oats. I did try cornmeal. I tried a bunch of flours. I just did tinkered with what I could get, at grocery stores to start with, and then feed stores. And so what I found is that the wheat bran is really optimal from a rearing perspective because it's very forgiving. Oats are very dense, and so they get heavy, right? They also will absorb all the moisture that is there, and they're highly susceptible to mold. And it's there's just a lot of problems with it that can be
Yeah.
avoided with wheat bran. But you can counterbalance those with just appropriate rearing, right? So don't add too much. If you have to use oats, don't add too much hydration, right? And too much is variable. If you're running at 50% humidity with an open drawer or open bin, you can throw in pieces of tomato, which are very moist. If you're in a closed bin, like a drawer system at 50% humidity, and you put a tomato in, you will have mold because there's just too much moisture, right? And so it's from a substrate perspective, bran is just much more forgiving, and is very easy for the beetles to move around in, right? Those oats are real dense, and so the bran is very easy for them to maneuver and go around in. They don't have to use their energy digging down. They can use their energy partying hard and laying eggs.
Giggity,
And so it's
giggity.
just a better environment from my perspective. And one of the
On
things I
on
recommend with any substrate that you're going to use is assume it has something in it. And by something, I mean a pest
Yes.
insect.
Yes.
So even food grade, so if you go to a grocery store and you're buying food grade, even food grade could potentially have something. It's a normal, natural thing. And so what I do to mitigate issues is I will deep freeze my bran for no less than 48 hours. And so deep freeze at 0 degrees Fahrenheit for no less than 48 hours to help mitigate any potential issues. From a scientific perspective, I have had people push back on that and say that's not killing what's in there. It's not addressing the issue. You really have to cook it. You can cook it, right? So that's another option. If you've got an oven at home, throw it in there. I don't know the temperature and timeline durations because I don't do that. The volume of bran I go through, I would use so much heat and time doing it that
Oh,
I can't stay viable. So
no.
I will deep freeze it for 48 hours. And what I have found is that has stopped any issues from a grain mite perspective, pantry moth, weevils, right? Those types of things that are present in grains. That has stopped that issue. And so deep freeze your substrate for at least 48 hours and then store it in a nice container, right? Something that'll keep the moisture out, something that'll keep bugs from, like your normal things that you would do in your kitchen to make sure you're not contaminating the food or feed. And then wheat bran is just solid for a long, long, long time, right? And so that's one of the key things that we do with our substrate is the deep freeze so that we prevent things like grain mites, which can destroy a colony, pantry moths, which are just plain annoying. I have some now that are still remnants from, I think it was late fall of last year. I brought one bag in. I was in a situation where I needed to finish out a task. And instead of waiting until the next day, I did not practice patience and I went and got a bag. I said, it'll be all right. Boom, within a month, I had pantry moths. And so they're not devastating to a colony. They're just annoying.
Yes.
Whereas grain mites, they can, if left uncontrolled, grain mites can destroy your colony. And, a lot of folks are raising these insects in their homes. And so I'm not an advocate of that because of the allergy issue. That can be addressed at some point. But if you're raising them in your house, you don't want these grain mites or these pantry moths anyway, right? And so take that time to deep freeze it or take the time to cook it because in the long run, it's really going to be beneficial.
But once you get them in, it feels like it's impossible to get rid of them. It really
Yep.
does.
Yep. The mitigation for the way to address that when it happens, I used some pantry moth baits. What you just described. As soon as we see one, everything stops and we go
Everything
get it and take care of it because that is the optimal way. The other thing is when we're doing our harvesting, either of the trays or beetle swap, the cocoons or the larva form of those pantry moths will collect the wheat bran around it. And so you can, like, if you see a clump of wheat bran, that shouldn't be there. That's probably the larva of the pantry moth. So go ahead and grab that and get that into your coal bin or get that outside for the birds or something like that.
Yes, and obviously, same for isopod keepers. You find a clump of dirt that looks like a long tube-ish
Yeah,
looking thing,
like
out.
spidery webby kind of
Spidery webby, yes, out. Get it out.
yeah.
Mealworms. Let's see. Foods. But first, temperatures and humidity.
Yep.
Foods. Let's talk about the hydration method that
Well,
you
I
use.
have one more comment for
Yeah, please.
humidity. So I don't want folks to think I don't have 80 Fahrenheit or 50% humidity. I can't do this. You can. That's the optimal scenario, and again, optimal for me. So hotter is actually better. So mealworms will actually perform better at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, even a little bit higher potentially. I run at 80 Fahrenheit for a few reasons. One is selfish. I don't want to work in 85 degrees Fahrenheit,
Right.
right? Like I don't want to go in there and work at that. What I found is that 79 actually feels really good. At 80, I start to sweat a lot, and that's just me and my biology, right? And so during the day, we're at 79, and overnight we go to 80. But running at 85 is problematic because the substrate and the mealworms will generate heat. The mealworms specifically will generate heat, right? And wheat bran, another good benefit to wheat bran is it doesn't hold that heat as much compared to oats or other options that are more dense. But those trays will actually be hotter than the ambient air depending on density of your larva, life stage, and air movement. And so by running at 79, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, we reduce that risk where a tray gets too hot because it's generating too much heat. The other thing is that the reason I do that is if something goes wrong in the farm, so if there's an air movement issue, if electricity goes out, if my HVAC breaks, which it has before, I have time before that farm gets too hot to address that issue, right? And so it's a risk mitigation for me. I am losing production and efficiency. If I ran at 85, those mealworms would grow faster and I could get more mealworms pumped out in a year. But the risk to that is I destroy the entire colony because I don't have time to address a problem. From a smaller perspective for folks that are keeping them at home, if your home is 74 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to be able to raise mealworms. 80 is going to do better, but 74 is actually better for you because that's your environment that you have and maintain for other things. What you'll find is that a good general rule is every 10 degrees you go down, you're gonna see a hit to your production, right? And by hit, I mean they'll just take longer to grow. They may not lay as many eggs in the 3 months like mine do, that sort of thing. So if you're running at 70 Fahrenheit, you're still gonna get mealworms. If you're running at 60, you'll still get them. It's just gonna take a little bit longer. Below 60, you really start to get into, they kind of go stagnant. They go not dormant, they're still moving around, but they're not going to grow. They're just going to kind of sit around. But that's good if you want to store your mealworms for longer use, right?
Yes.
So from an environment perspective, that 80 Fahrenheit is sort of a guideline, right? I would recommend start a little lower, start at like 70 to 75, and see how your environment responds to that. If you've got drawers that are closed, those are going to be warmer potentially, right? There's going to be a microclimate in that drawer compared to ambient temperatures. And so you just kind of have to tinker a little bit and adjust as you go. The 50% humidity, again, higher is better, oddly enough, up to 70%, based on studies and research and stuff that I've done, 70% humidity works really well. The problem with 70% is, again, if it goes higher, and even at 70, the risk for mold, right? But if it goes higher, you really start seeing issues that you have to maintain and address. It just becomes more work than it's worth for me personally. And so we run at 50%, but we hydrate three to four times a week to offset that need for hydration. If you are in, I had this recently. Somebody was out west, southwest, and it's like 20% humidity on a good day, right? You're going to have to hydrate those mealworms or come up with an alternative option to keep them producing optimally. But 20% is okay. You're going to see higher die off of your pupa. You're going to see some struggled growth potentially, but they'll still produce. And so it's just a matter of how much do you want to produce, how much time do you want to invest in it, or what can you set up to address that humidity scenario. In my opinion, 50 is ideal because it allows for that variance of life where all of a sudden the dehumidifier goes out and it starts to bump up to 55, 60 until you get it fixed. Or, the weather changes and all of a sudden it's 20% humidity and you need to adjust that way. Figure out what your current environment's like and then try to tailor the mealworms around that. Because there's a lot of different solutions. You can create microclimates in drawers and put in a very lightly misted paper towel, right? Don't drench it, but lightly mist it and put it in there, close it, and in a 20% humidity, Arizona desert environment, you've created a microclimate for the mealworms. And so you can address these things based on what you want to do as a keeper.
Gosh, great points, especially about, what your expectations are as a keeper. I'm going to throw in there that we're kind of focusing on breeding, but I also want to focus on just keeping to feed your reptiles. Let's say you buy 1,000 mealworms, you're bringing them in. You don't want to keep them in a small container, 1,000 mealworms at, 80 degrees or so, because they're going to pupate like that.
Right.
So you want to give them a bigger container. Maybe you want to put, Justin has talked about, the bran base. Maybe you want to put some egg cartons on there to separate them out to dissipate that heat a little bit more. Again, mealworms on top of mealworms is going to generate a lot of heat, and
Yep.
that causes your mealworms to pupate just that much faster.
Right.
So, from a keeping standpoint, kind of think about those considerations as well.
And the other thing that that egg carton does is it adds surface area and actually decreases the density of the larva in that container. And so what I'm finding is that density is a big impact. Density and feed availability is a big impact to pupation. So higher temperatures, you've already mentioned, does impact it, but that density of the larva, if you put a lot of larva in one container without any feed, they're less likely to want to pupate. If you put less larvae in there with no feed, they're more likely to pupate, right? And from a biological perspective, if the colony is very dense and there's nowhere to go, why should we pupate and become a beetle to reproduce? Because we've got nowhere to go. We've got nothing to, like, there's no benefit here. And so that surface area where you've just added that in with the egg carton, that also works for beetles as well. If you want to keep more beetles in a container, but you don't have more space, or you don't like, you can add that in there in order to add more surface area for those beetles to not be as dense and not be as angry, right? If you put 20 humans in an elevator, we're not going to be happy for long, right? Give us more space and we'll do better. Same thing with the beetles. That adds that surface area by including something like the egg cartons.
Perfect. Perfect. And again, that's why we're doing this video, is to add not just, the basics that I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to,
Right.
these are very, very key points here. Thank you very much for bringing that up, Justin. Excellent points. Let's talk about, let's throw it all together. Let's talk about food and hydration.
Sure. So from a hydration perspective, I've tried several things over the years. So I did carrots and potatoes at first. And then I started looking at alternative options because from a labor and time perspective, there was an impact. Also from a cost perspective, it was something that I just needed to be aware of because at the scale I was at, very tiny, very small, I'm just buying potatoes and carrots from the store. I'm not buying in bulk from a supplier or a restaurant supplier or something like that. But what I found is that my biggest impact was time. And so from a hydration perspective, what's really beneficial for mealworms is to give them a lot of surface area so that everybody can consume at the same time. And so you've got to take that, you can't take a potato and just throw it in, right? You've got to slice and dice and do something to that potato. And so if you take that potato and you cut it into wedge style French fries, that's great. You've taken that and cut it into 8 pieces, you put that in your tray. If you've got a lot of mealworms in there, not everybody's going to be able to eat. And so what'll happen is that potato will start to dry up. And once it dries up, they're less inclined to eat it. They'll still do it over time, but they won't eat it as quickly because the benefit to them to eat it was the moisture. They'll get nutrients from it, but once they have enough of that nutrient, they kind of wait for a while, right? After you've eaten the same thing for 4 days in a row, you don't want to eat it on that 5th day, right? The same thing for them. And so those potatoes will just dry up. And now you're wasting resources, you've wasted your time, the mealworms aren't getting what they need. And so if you slice that differently, right? If you literally slice it into the scallop, oh man, I don't cook that often. Let's say
Scallops,
smaller
right?
French fries,
Yeah,
scallop.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, I was on the right track. You slice it into those, you've increased the surface area that you can get more mealworms over there to eat, right? And so that just takes time. One of the things that I started using was a French fry slicer, and not the smallest attachment to it, but like the second smallest. I found.
Did you go out and get the Vegematic? Is that what you got? The
I got one
Vegematic?
that was like what's
Ronco's?
the fry place that has the thing? Five Guys, right? Like you can see
Yep,
that
yep.
they've got it on the wall. I grabbed one of those,
Perfect.
and that was super fast compared to what I was doing.
Yes.
And so I would do that both with carrots and potatoes. And I found that either option worked for the mealworms. I didn't see a big bump from carrots or a big bump from potatoes. It was
Oh.
just a good hydration source. It worked. And so, interesting tidbit. So if you feed them the carrots, the frass will have an orange color to it. Anything you feed them, the frass will be tinted.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Carrots and potatoes is how I originally started because that's what everybody says to use. It's easily accessible. Anybody can slice up a potato, that sort of thing. Then I realized that from a volume perspective, the volume of potatoes and carrots that I would have to take the time to go get, have somewhere to store them, right? That was the big thing for me is the storage of them, and then to have to process. Um, I realized that was going to be a hurdle, and so I started tinkering with water gel crystals, and this will probably be one of the biggest things that people will talk about from this video because it's a very contentious thing. So I use water gel crystals exclusively in the farm at this point. My water gel crystals come from waterzorb.com. It's a small business that family runs. Fantastic service, great product. Have not had any issues. Water-zorb.com. I get nothing from that. I don't do deals with them. They just have a great product, great service, so I like to promote them.
We'll
Um,
put the link in the description.
Perfect. So I use those water gel crystals. I use the large ones, and I
Yes.
hydrate those, and I use those 3 times a week. From an application perspective, uh, the water gel crystals and carrots and potatoes are also good in this sense where they're not oversaturated. So I mentioned earlier about tomatoes, right? Things that have a lot of water in them. You want to try to avoid that because it just creates that scenario of too much hydration at once. They only need to drink so much, right? Like we can only drink so much in a day, they can only drink so much in a day. They only want to drink so much in a day. And so if you overhydrate anything, whether it's potatoes, if you put too many in there, you're just going to end up with a mess. And so the water gel crystals are a nice consistency. They're kind of like Jello, right? And so folks have used those in the past and said, well, they're too liquidy. Add less water, right? Like it, and what I found is that water varies quite a bit, right? And so add a little bit less water, and it won't be as soupy or as watery.
I'm going to add, you mentioned big, and you almost glossed over it, and I'm going to bring it up
Okay.
strongly at this point, is because I just made the wrong mistake because I ordered the 5 pounds of the micro gel
Mhm.
crystals, and it's like gel soup.
Yes.
So if you're going to order the big crystals
Yep.
because it's just cleaner and it's easier to spread out, and so very,
From a
very big
process
point for me.
perspective, it's much easier for us to distribute those across the tray, right?
Yes.
So I've got videos where I'm talking while I'm doing hydration, and I'm literally flinging these things in on the side, right? And by having the large ones, they tumble across, right? And so they spread
Yes.
out.
Easy peasy.
Same thing with carrots or potatoes. If you're dicing those, it makes it easier to fling across the tray. Uh,
With the small crystals, it's like I'm adding a glob of mashed potatoes right in the
yep,
middle, and it's just a mess. So I have to be more particular, and yeah, it's a
yep.
terrible decision on my part.
Yep, yeah, the large ones work really well. And from a storage perspective, for me, right, what works best for me, I can store hundreds of pounds of those crystals in a very small, compact spot, and then get more trays in the farm instead of taking up space with pallets of potatoes or carrots, which is
Yes.
where I would be at this point. And so water gel crystals are fantastic from my perspective because we can hydrate them. Even at 50% humidity, we're feeding 3 to 4 times a week, throwing in different size handfuls depending on life stage. So we've got a big handful for most of them, small handful for the smaller ones. We actually don't hydrate the babies for 4 weeks. So we don't mess with them. In your scenario, you mentioned that earlier, like use the potato to collect them, but don't use the potato to hydrate. It's going to go to waste. Just give them a
Yes.
little
Yes.
time. Mealworms will absorb moisture from the environment, right? So they can actually absorb it. That's why the 70% humidity works so well. But as the humidity level gets lower, it takes them more energy to absorb it, and then they'll grow slower. And so hydrating is a good method. Um, do what works best for you, right? Like that, we've talked about that already. The downsides that I've heard from folks about the water gel crystal is that it's not a naturally occurring thing, right? Like it's a thing that's man-made, and it's not good for animals. I agree that I shouldn't eat water gel crystals. You shouldn't have them around, kids, that sort of thing, because kids put things in their mouth that they shouldn't, right? Same thing, you don't give them a penny. You don't want to do that, right? It's a chemical in the sense that you'll see me wearing gloves when I'm using it. The reason I'm wearing gloves is because I touch it 4 to 5 to potentially 6 times a week. My exposure to it is far greater than anybody else. And so I'll equate it to like a paint booth or a spray painter. When I go outside to spray paint my furniture in the spring just to freshen it up, I'm not going out there with everything, on. I'm going to go out and hold my breath and slow that, right? And I might breathe in a little bit of it, but I do that once a year if I'm lucky. If my job and my passion is to go into a booth and spray a car, I'm going to mask up. I'm going to have on the proper equipment. So the same thing with the water gel crystals. It's just because we're touching them all the time, we're going to wear gloves. It's also gooey and kind of gross in the sense that when you're done, your hands are kind of sticky and full of water gel crystal, right? And so take the glove off. You're right. Take the glove off, and we can get back to work faster. Um, the reason I'm okay with the water gel crystals, and honestly, in any food source that you want to use, is that within 72 hours, that insect has gotten rid of whatever it is eating,
Yes.
right? And so reptile keepers are intimately familiar with this. You gut load and then you feed. Why is that? Because after a certain amount of time, and I'm quoting the 72 hours from a study that was done, after that time, they've expelled everything that's in there. And so the water gel crystal that I feed is through their system and out of their system by the time it gets to somebody to eat them. Well, something, not somebody, right? Of food and feed, there's a difference there. And so I'm comfortable with feeding them water gel crystal because of that. There was a study in 2019 by Stanford where they looked at mealworms and styrofoam. And
Yes.
so the big question surrounding that is, well, what happens to it, right? And so what Stanford looked at is they looked at the larva, they looked at the mealworm itself, and they looked at the frass. After they fed it, nothing but styrofoam. And within 24 hours, it still had, inside the larva, still had chemical components of that styrofoam. 48 hours, there was much less. 72 hours, it was gone. The frass still had styrofoam chemical, right? Like I'm not a chemist, but it still had enough remnants there. Like we're not magically getting rid of styrofoam with mealworms. But the mealworm itself was fine. And so that's where, what I tell folks who are raising their own mealworms, well, what do I feed them? What are you going to use them for? If you're going to use them for reptiles, avoid citrus, right? Reptiles and citrus don't get along. So don't
Yes.
feed them citrus. If you have to, wait 72 hours, wait 96 hours, give them time to get rid of that, and then move forward, right? But feed them what works best for you. If I had to use anything other than water gel crystals, my costs for you would be much, much higher. It's just a fact, right? And so that has allowed me to stay sustainable. But again, balancing what's actually good for folks, the water gel crystal is expelled within 72 hours. Um, and
Excellent.
I'm
I'm sorry.
open to people saying, here's why I don't think that's correct. Let's work on that together. Let's adjust if we have to. And so, my way is not the way. I'm always open to what do I not know yet that needs to be changed or adjusted, and ready and willing to hear that.
But I've said years and years and years, don't go out to the pet stores and buy crickets and feed them immediately to your reptiles. It's just not a good practice at all. Um, you want that time for them to cleanse. We'll call it cleanse.
Yep.
And you want that time to actually cleanse and then gut load. I'm as much as I am a huge proponent to dusting and supplementing. We're talking about reptiles. We're not talking about raising for as far as a business. We're talking about reptiles. I'm not a proponent of doing the water crystals and then feeding your insects to your reptiles. Do I use water crystals? Occasionally. Occasionally. For me, it is imperative that if I'm feeding this afternoon, this morning, all the insects are getting carrots or sweet potatoes or pumpkin or squash or something that they're going to go through and they're going to gut load. 6, 7, 8 hours, and now I'm ready to feed. And
Yep.
you're right. This is not for human consumption. The one time I did, it clogged up our toilets for weeks. So just be aware of that, folks. Be very, very careful with that.
Good advice.
Um, I'm going to bring up a very controversial topic
Okay.
for you and I, especially. And if you didn't notice, When I saw your very first video showing this for a hydration method, it was like,
What?
what? What is he doing? This is against I had preached for years and years. The worst thing for your mealworms is moisture. Worst thing. And here, I watched one of your videos. It's like spray water all over the place and get them wet. And it's like this guy said, "What? What is this guy doing?" No, I didn't. I wasn't that extreme. It was like, Justin, this is against every ounce of uh, knowledge that I have. What are you doing? What is your? And I tried it. I tried it a couple of times, and again, it was so against,
Yep.
my instincts. I stopped doing it, and I reverted back because I could, because I have such a smaller, quantity.
Right.
I reverted back to feeding the vegetables. Um, what is your philosophy with spraying down for a hydration? Kind of talk through that
Yep.
process and how that's changed over the years. If you've changed your thoughts on that, or
I
or
have.
what?
I have.
Okay.
So that attempt or that experiment was very much related to the process improvement and the goal of increasing production, maximizing production in that building without draining the energy and everything from the humans that are in there. And
Yes.
so what I found is one of the biggest labor tasks in the farm is the hydration process. And so, 3 times a week, we're going through and we're touching probably about 2,000 of those trays. That takes hours, right? And so
Hours.
we're probably at, I would say, 3 to 4 hours, 3 times a week for hydration. And so that was one of the things high on my list of like, how can I improve this? What can I do? And at the time, what I was seeing is a lot of spraying, right? And so a lot of automation. And so one of the things that's become much more prevalent in the last year is, automated insect rearing. And so a couple years ago when I was doing this, I'm like, okay, well, how can I replicate what the big guys are saying is working, right?
Yes.
And what the big guys say and what actually works aren't always the same. But I was like, all right, there's got to be something to this. What is there to it? Just like you did, like it went against what you know, right? But you tried it anyway. So I was like, okay, well, what's the deal here? And so I hooked up a hose. I had a 45 psi pump. I had a water tank, and I did a test. I was just misting, and what I found is I could hit a stack of trays with that mister very fast compared to throwing water gel crystals and having to get another scoop and throwing, right? Um, and initially, I've mentioned earlier, only test something on your colony for an amount of your colony you're willing to lose, right? Worst case
Yes.
scenario, what you do
Yes.
causes those insects to not be around anymore, right? And so don't put yourself in that position where you're really in trouble. So I did it on one stack of trays, and things looked good. I was a little impatient because what I did next was I moved to not just a misting, but a more volume in the spray. And so what I found is I would sit there and mist, and then I would have to go to the next tray and mist, and I'd have to go to the next tray and mist. It wasn't fast enough. I'm like, okay, but why not just spray in here? And so I did. I switched to more volume in the tray, and it was enough to get the bran moistened, right? And there's videos you can go back on my YouTube channel and search like spraying and water and whatnot, and you'll see me with the hose on, almost full force, 45 psi. Just what I have learned from that is it actually lengthened the grow out period for those trays. So instead of being a 2 to 3 month grow out, it extended it beyond 3 months. Um, I don't I don't have direct proved answers, but what I've noticed and what I've seen is a couple of things. So one, by putting that much water in the tray, the frass that was in there absorbed it. And so I think the original testing I did probably had less frass in the tray. And so that was one of my key problems at the beginning, was not testing enough variation, right? And so by having frass in the tray, the frass is absorbing that water. They're not actively wanting to eat their frass, right? Like there's actually a lot of nutrients in the frass. Protein is actually pretty high, oddly enough. It's a soil amendment. It's got a lot of nutrients, but it's not something they want to actively eat. It's their waste product, right? And so the moisture just sits there. They're not actively getting that moisture that the frass has absorbed. If there was less bran in there, they would eat that. But remember earlier I mentioned once they're done eating carrots and they're full of those nutrients, they don't want to go back to the carrot for a while. So that bran that was saturated with moisture would just evaporate because they would eat enough, like, okay, it's wet now, but I've already had enough bran for today. And so they weren't actually getting more moisture. Um, and by spraying them, one of the things I've heard anecdotally from other insect producers is that it shocks the insect. And so by throwing that much volume in that fast, it's kind of like if I hit you with a full bore spray outside playing, like you're going to enjoy it there. But if you're inside sitting on your couch and I spray you, what the heck? It's going to interrupt your scenario, right?
My wife does it all the time, so I don't know why it
Then
would be
that
any different for you.
needs to get in order here. By spraying them, I think I was actually doing more harm than good. And so once I saw the data, right? So I keep track of the data in the farm that I can that's feasible. And what I saw is just extended growth, larval growth times. And the only thing I had modified for those trays was spraying. So that's the one thing that I did stick to was instead of stacking changes upon changes, I did that one change and just let's see how it goes. So I did good there, but that spraying was actually doing more harm than good. And so I stopped and went back to just water gel crystals and immediate results. So there's something about having the physical moisture in there from a water gel, potato, carrot, whatever you're throwing in there, being available to them to go and consume and potentially go walk away, come back and eat when they want to, right? There's something about that physical form or the less voluminous all at once. So the next, I think the thing to try is misting as opposed to hard spraying. And so that's the next step in the progression is the experiment with misting, which is going to start hopefully for me in the next couple of months. But the spraying was problematic.
I love how you followed it up with, we backed all the way up.
That was really tough for me to do personally because I post all this stuff to social, right? I've taken a break over the last few months because things have been crazy. I started the soldier fly larva, so there's not as much out there right now. But I was posting 2, 3, 4 times a day, little snippets, and I do longer videos too. And I remember people just telling me in very polite ways and in very not polite ways, "You're crazy, man. This is not going to work. You're wrong." And
I never said you were crazy. I didn't use those words.
A lot of other people did, and so I was very biased in the sense that I wanted it to work. I wanted to be right, right? The humans want to be right, and so I very much defended that. And no, it's going to work. Here's why it's working. It's saving me so much time. And man, did I have to eat that because it did not pan out well. And so we stepped back, went back to that water gel crystal scenario, and just I kind of left it alone for a little while. I had to get past that failure point, and then then I started thinking, okay, well, what did I do wrong there? And that's what I just walked through because I've analyzed this already in my head 1,000 times. And so the next progression in that hydration world is the misting as opposed to heavy. And I think that's going to be a very impactful thing. Although I thought the spraying was going to be impactful. So time will tell. Right? The better use for misting is like that Southwest scenario or the real dry winters where, to avoid pupa die-off. Those guys aren't able to absorb moisture. They don't eat or consume anything when they're in the pupal stage. And so if you've got real low humidity, one of the ways to combat that is to, mist a paper towel or mist off. Don't mist the actual pupa themselves, but mist off somewhere to the side, create that microclimate around them to increase humidity. That is an appropriate space right now for misting. I've seen success with higher humidity for them, not too high. I did a test one time where it was 80% in a grow tent and massive die-off. So don't go wild with it. Just keep it nice and steady. But that's a good application for the misting.
You're talking about some challenges, but your challenges are trying to take it to that next level. Obviously, this watering was an issue. What are keepers, more common keepers? What are some of the issues that they're going to incur that maybe you've had yourself over the years? You talked about, a couple of The moths, the mites, and how do they overcome those issues?
Green mites are a scary one, both psychologically and just from a colony perspective, but from a those things move, right? And so if
Yeah.
you've got reptiles as well, that is a very scary proposition.
Yes.
Green mites are a big one, and then scaling up. Um, we can talk about that one because even
Yeah.
going from like three drawers, let's say your reptile business goes bonkers and you need more of them, scaling up, uh, that is a daunting thing and is going to be much different than what you think it can be. So let's tackle green mites first.
Cool.
Green mites are, they're a common pest. They happen. They've happened to me. So there have been four times that it's happened. The reason I know it's four times is because that is a very impactful event.
Yes.
When you walk into your farm where you're taking care of things and you're trying to do what's best, and all of a sudden you see green mites, like sheer panic. And so green mites are very impactful. Trying to avoid them. So that's we talked about like deep freezing or heating. Those two methods, they're going to take you time, but anytime I even tempt myself with, I'll just go grab a bag because I got to get this done, I will re-feel that panic of seeing green mites because it's so terrible, right? And it's so scary. And so, if you haven't had green mites, you're probably going to think, it'll be all right. I don't need the free stuff. Like, well, I have to wait 2 days. I have to do the work of putting it right. Once you have that experience is the best teacher. Come back to this video or go back to the directions to cook things in the oven. That is the best method to avoid green mites. If you get them, you can get rid of them. So there's a couple different options right out of the gate. The first one is if you are a new mealworm keeper, sometimes it's better to just start over. And that's a difficult thing to do, right? Because what
Yes.
that means is killing the insects that you've got, right? And that's a very difficult thing for some people to do. And it also means admission of failure, right? And so if you have to start over, you didn't do something right, and that's a tough pill to swallow. Uh, but sometimes, like if you've got a three drawer system that's sitting on your shelf or in your cabinet or somewhere real small, sometimes it's easier to just wipe that out, empty that out, clean that out, and start over. Um, and you've got to make sure you really clean that well, right? So soap, water. Those little guys are tiny. They're going to move around, but honestly, sometimes that's the quickest method to address a green mite outbreak. Uh, I couldn't do that. And what I mean by that is
No.
I have an operation where if I have green mites, by the time I find them, so the last one was 2 years ago, I made a playlist for this to kind of walk through the progression of how I tackled it. Um,
I'll
for
find that, Justin, and I'll add that to the video description.
Perfect. So it's got in there like what I did, and what happened is I found it on I want to say it was like three or four stacks of 15 to 20 trays, and I just can't get rid of those. Right. From a production perspective, I do need to try to save those, and so if you have more than you're willing to just let go and start over, you can defeat the grain mites. It is possible. The way that I do that is with split pea flour. Split pea flour is just peas, right? So they come split peas because they're dried and the pea breaks in half. Split pea flour, you can buy it as the flour, or what I do is I buy the split peas and I have a grinder. And so I grind it up when needed. I've seen anecdotal and some scientific research posted from other folks where they said that after you grind it, it starts to lose the potency of what makes it work against grain mites. And so it's one of those things where you want to balance having some in case you have an outbreak versus is it really degrading over time. The split pea flour that I used at the time, I think, was several months old. So it still worked, it was still effective. But I will grind that up, and I also just have split peas on hand so that when it happens, I'm ready to respond to that. But split pea flour is safe for the mealworms. So throw it in the tray because that will not hurt the mealworms and it's going to hurt the grain mites. I do have a published study on my website At one time, I used to sell split pea flour, and so I wanted to make sure people weren't just thinking that I was telling you it was going to work because I was selling it, right? And so there's a research published study that shows split pea flour is effective at getting rid of mites. With my experience as well, it is effective at getting rid of mites. I no longer sell that because it's another thing to have to carry, and from a business perspective, it's too much time. But throw that split pea flour into the container with the larva, the pupa, the beetles. It's not going to hurt the mealworms. You also, I created kind of a barrier around those trays. So I segregated those trays and I put a moat of split pea flour around them. And it's like literally on the floor. I have a concrete floor, so I have that luxury, literally around it so that it stopped them. They hit that and they don't want to go across it. It needs
To
to be,
contain them into those containers that had that,
and so it
a
stops it.
little bit so you didn't get more into those containers, but more so that they didn't spread.
Right. Because they'll just keep going, right? Like that's
Yep.
what insects do. That's what mites do. They just keep going, and so that contained them. And that's one of the biggest things is that containment, right? Because if you can contain them, then the rest of the operation, the rest of your trays can continue just fine, and you manage that outbreak where it's at. And so, putting the split pea flour around whatever's going on, let's say you have a stackable tray, take that stackable tray and put it in a tote of some kind, a Rubbermaid container, and just put split pea flour in there so that you're containing that outbreak. And once you've done that, once you have containment, reducing humidity, yes, you're potentially going to impact your colony, right? Your mealworm colony. They will survive. They'll be okay. But reducing the humidity down below 30%, and those grain mites start to die off. They don't do well in low humidity. You can then at that point create traps, like put a little container of water into where the mites are at. The mites are attracted to that, so they're going to go to that. Petroleum jelly around the top of containers. So depending again on what kind of, this is the good and bad about raising mealworms. You can be using drawers, you could be using open containers, right? You can be using one big giant aquarium. Folks will raise them in that aquarium. That's another contentious thing we can talk about at some point. They'll raise them all levels or all stages in one container. Put some petroleum jelly nice and thick around the top to contain the mites within there so that they're not overflowing and zombieing and getting out and spreading. So lowering the humidity is a pretty impactful thing for those grain mites. I couldn't do that in the mealworm farm because if I lower it down to that low, the entire colony is impacted, right? So that's where the containment came in, and then adding the split pea flour into the container with the mealworms. Wally, from your perspective, I don't know how isopods or other insects respond to the split pea flour, but the mealworms are not negatively impacted by it.
I think I'm going to try that out. I think that in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to try that out because I've heard the split pea powder works really well. I've had, just real quick, I've had mites one time with one of my colonies of mealworms, and I'm so cheap that I thought, oh, I can solve this without throwing away one container of mealworms and replace it for $5. So I did the diatomaceous earth. So I
Mhm.
did 15 quart into a 27 quart diatomaceous earth at the bottom of the 27 quart, and it was every day. It was changing that container, the 27 quart container, every day because it went from white to maple syrup brown. The mites were so bad. And eventually, after doing that for about a week, it was like, what the heck am I thinking? And I threw the whole mess out.
Right.
Never again. So I want to try the split pea flour, and I'd like to try it with a colony of, powder blues or something inexpensive to see if they would react to that. Good
Okay.
call.
Good deal. So yeah, the mites were probably the biggest thing that folks run into from a rearing perspective, outside of just the challenges of raising the insect themselves. What was the second thing that we were
We
going
were
to talk?
talking about scaling up.
Scaling. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what I found with my experience of scaling up, you're producing the amount of mealworms you need, and then for whatever crazy reason you decide you want to do more. Over the course of the last 8 years, I started with 3 trays, and what I found is every time I expanded, I would triple in size. Oddly enough, it kind of worked out that way. And so one of the first videos and pictures I ever published was a tower system I built down in my basement using some seven or 9 gallon cement mixing trays and some wood, and I had
Yep.
a tower in there. Whenever I expanded, I built 3 of those, so there were 3, and it just seemed to triple every time. And what I noticed is that what I would do for 12 trays was different enough with 36 trays that it's not just cut and paste. There's going to be changes that happen as a result of adjusting your colony size that it almost feels like you're starting brand new again. It can be very, very frustrating because you're just humming along for a year, 2, 3, well, however long you've been raising them, doing fine, and then you add in additional colony to take care of, and it's just frustrating. One of the biggest things to tackle is your beetle rotation, and making sure you have enough beetles, which means having enough pupa, which means holding enough larvae once they get to that point in order to get the pupa to get the beetles. And managing that schedule can be difficult. Because early on in the video here, I talked about the egg laying, increasing and then decreasing. And so in a very micro-sized colony of 3, 10 drawers, something like that, you're just adding more beetles in as you get them because the larvae will pupate kind of when they feel like it. You grab those, throw them in, everything's great. As you start to get to the point where you have, more trays and more beetles, you need to manage that a bit more. And that's really where the challenge comes in, is adjusting your time, energy, and processes to be able to tackle how many mealworms do I keep out of what I harvest in order to produce the pupa that I need for getting the beetles that I need, and when and how, like, keeping track of it becomes much more of a burden. And so, if you're going to scale, scale slowly and have a backup plan. And what I
Yes.
mean by that is what you mentioned of you produce your own mealworms. Every now and then you need to outsource that. And so before you go to scale that up, who do you know locally? I'm a big proponent of getting local, right? So things like Facebook groups. You can't sell live animals on Facebook, so don't go looking for live insects. But there are people that have found ways to address that. Look on local apps to see who might be producing mealworms near you, and see if you can establish a relationship with them, right? If not, then find somebody locally, regionally local to where you're at, so that there's less transit time, less potential for issues, and get comfortable with them before you decide to make that big change and expand, because things are going to happen outside of your control, and you want to be able to address that with either beetles, fresh beetles that have been just hatched in order to get your colony stable from an egg production, or having a larva to feed and take care of your primary use for those mealworms. Your processes will change, and they're going to change depending on what's going on. So I had a scenario where I went from 3 trays, or no, 10 trays here in this closet back over there, down to the 12 trays down in my basement, and it was a completely different environment from a temperature humidity perspective. Going from one level to the next is a 5 to 10 degree change, and that was enough to, like, they're not growing the same they were before. I don't have as many pupa. Why is this happening? I had to enclose that thing and then figure out how to heat it, right? Like, things changed that I didn't really pay attention to or know until I did that change. And so you can plan as much as you want to, but things are going to happen you can't control. So having a backup plan, having something that you can, maybe you only move part of that colony as opposed to all of it as you start to expand and grow, and then transition once you've got everything stable.
To your point, one of the biggest moves that I made years ago was, I'm sure it was caused by a or multiple shipments during a summer where the mealworms came in and they were fried, too hot. 20 years ago or so, I thought, "Oh, I've got to raise my own just in case this happens as a contingency." So started raising them, and one pan of playing around turned into, like you said, 10 pans, 10 27-quart sweater
Hmm.
boxes full of mealworms. And the big difference for me was in the one pan. If I wanted, I didn't really have to do anything. I'd always find mealworms if I wanted to feed,
Yep.
5 or 6 animals. But if I'm feeding, 750 enclosures and I have 12 pans, the big change for me was sorting and sifting
Yep.
and cleaning. It wasn't one, two, three. So I looked for optimal ways to collect the beetles,
Hmm.
to sift out the pupa. Mention again, just real quick, the Space Coast mealworms.
Yes, sir. Space
Is that
Ghost.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Great product. Again, link in the description.
Yep.
But for collecting beetles, talk about how you collect the beetles out of this massive organization of breeding mealworms,
Yep.
please.
You're touching on a sore spot for me because it is so inefficient. It drives me crazy. But it works. So the method I use even now is the paper towel method. So I will collect those pupa. I collect the pupa out of the trays because the mealworms and the beetles will both cannibalize, right? And so pupa are just little delicious packets of moisture that can't move and defend themselves, right? And so it is in a scenario where you're trying to breed the mealworms and maintain a colony, you do want to separate out those pupa. And so we'll sift the pupa out and then put them in their own trays. And what we'll do is try to keep the depth of that to about 1 to 2 pupa. You don't want to make it too deep because then they start to stack on each other. Pressure, moisture, air movement can't happen. And then what we'll do is we'll put a simple paper towel on top. As those beetles hatch, they're going to go and grab onto that paper towel. And 3 times a week, we go through and we pick up our paper towels and we knock them off into a bucket and then put it back, and then knock it off into a bucket and put it back. That probably gets us about 80 to 85% of those beetles. And it's a sore spot for me because those remaining 10 to 15% drives me insane. I like, there has to be a better way. It's not high on the list yet because what we're doing works. And so that's our method for getting those beetles out of there so that they're not sitting there eating the pupa. There are different options to make this less of a chore or less of a burden. At a smaller scale, one of the things that works really well is a pupa bridge. I'll give you 2 options for that one. So I'll plug Scott again. He's got pupa bridges that are available. I also have a video on how to make your own using a fruit container from the store. Like it doesn't need to be fancy. It's something that's
Right.
elevated above. You're going to put it in your beetle tray. It's elevated above the substrate and the beetles so they can't get up to it. You put your pupa on top, the pupa hatch, the beetles do a little tumble off down into that nice soft substrate, and then join the other beetles and start partying. And so there's a very simple method for that. That doesn't scale well. I've tried it, and it just doesn't scale well for the volume that we need. But it works really well, especially if you're constrained on space, because then you don't have to have a separate pupa container or trays. You can integrate that right into your beetle trays by having it up off of the beetles and put your pupa on top of it. You've now saved yourself a tray or multiple, depending on how many you're doing. Um, so that's been our method for collecting the beetles. One of the things that I'm curious about, if anybody knows, is there a way to attract those beetles with either some sort of pheromone or light? I saw a recent study about another kind of insect where they used red light to attract it from a pest prevention perspective. And so, can we create a red light district for the beetles, and maybe they'll go towards that and fall into something that we can collect? Like, has anybody tinkered with that? There's just random things that I have stopped myself from trying to experiment because there's already too much going on. So we stick with the paper towel method for right now.
You talk about the red light district attracting red lights. All of that I can think of is Beetlejuice, where they're trying to attract
Yeah.
him away, and
Yep.
the signs. Yeah.
Yep.
Good point. I've tried the little shelf things as well with very little success. I shouldn't say little success. It worked, but it was so resource intensive. Um,
Right.
I do the paper towel as well. And just real quick, all that you do is when you have the pupas, just lay a flat piece of paper towel on it. When the beetles hatch out, just pick up that paper. I think you said this, but pick up the paper towel and just go, and they all fall off.
Yep.
into another container, hopefully.
I will, yeah, I will actually take that thing and kind of snap it
There
down,
you go.
and they'll fall off. I've tried like newspaper from a resource perspective. One of the things I try to keep in mind is paper towels are a consumable, meaning you use them for a while and then they're gone, right? Newspaper is people have used newspaper. I actually get some newspaper from a couple local places to use as packing material, not in the bag itself with the mealworms, but around them sometimes, or some other things that I ship. And so I did try newspaper. I tried clean, regular, like ready to be used newspaper that didn't have ink on it. They don't stick or cling as well to it, and so they just slip right off. So there's enough to grab onto from a paper towel perspective for those beetles that they want to be around it and on it, and then you shake them off. It's also breathable enough that the pupa that are underneath it don't get too hot, and they don't get pressured and to the point where they start to die off. Right. So if you get them too thick, you're going to see die off on the bottom from a weight perspective, but also from just a moisture air perspective. So the paper towel allows that movement of the air as well.
It's interesting that in your facility you're doing the same thing that I'm doing with, 5 or 10 or however many mealworm containers that I'm running right now. Paper towel, knock them off. It's super easy. But I'm with you in that there's got to be a better way because I just knocked off, 50 of them, but there's three still in the tub. That's going to bother me all day. There's still three there. Okay, I'm
Oh,
going to pick them.
with the paper towels, the beetles like to get in between the two layers, right? And so
Ah,
you'll do that, and then there'll be like three or four in there. Oh,
this
it's not worth
is
the time to get them out.
yes. Let's talk about practicality. And here's a money saving option for keepers. So, oh my gosh, if you're a keeper and you have 1 or 5 or 10 animals and you're buying 100 mealworms at a time, oh my gosh, do we have a tip for you? I've been doing this for years and years, and you can help me understand better how to improve this process. But it seems to be working for me. I don't buy, I'll use up, I want to say probably 2,000 mealworms a feeding ish, 3,000, 4,000 maybe. I don't know if I'm feeding more. Anyways, so I'm not buying because the cost of shipping is a consideration for us. I'm not buying 4 or 5,000 at a time. I'm buying 40,000 mealworms. Um, we get them in, we empty them into a big plastic container. We do the newspaper thing that you're mentioning, and we shake, shake, shake. And there's always one super mealworm that is like holding on and never gets off. And then we get that one off. That takes us 10 minutes. Then we throw away the paper towel or newspaper, and then we're going to keep out about 5 to 10,000 for a couple of feedings. Okay, what do we do with the other 30,000? Why did I order so much? Talk about an option for those that want to save money, that are cheap like me and don't want to pay, 5 different shipping costs.
The cold storage is key for that. And honestly, a regular human fridge works perfectly fine if you're comfortable and everyone in the house is okay with having bugs in your fridge.
What?
You can store mealworms in your fridge for weeks at a time.
Nanette, don't listen to this.
It's pretty simple, but you can make it real difficult. From a storage perspective, you want to be nice and flat. You want to keep the depth low. And
Yes.
so, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch is perfectly fine. You don't want to go too deep because once those guys get cold, they start slowing down. The larvae aren't going to move around as much. And so that unfortunate larva that's at the bottom of the pile, if you get too deep, the moisture is going to build up in there. They're going to eventually die. And so you want to be mindful to get those nice, flat, long trays. Don't get the big, tall, deep trays or containers, right? And so storing those in the fridge with a shallow depth is key, and you do want to have some ventilation. And so whether that's holes in a lid or whether it's just flat open with no lid, again, do what's comfortable, but you need some ventilation because the mealworms do have moisture within themselves. And so if you close them in an enclosed container, you're going to see moisture build up. the moisture is going to build up and drop down into the bottom and cause some breathing issues for those mealworms, and just some moisture condense. Same reason you don't want moisture in general from a bacteria and mold perspective. So you want to have either an open container or a container with enough enough openings that it's ventilating out. And really that's just to react as it happens, right? So how many holes? Well, enough holes that you don't have moisture on the side. If you've got moisture on the side, add some more holes.
Bad. That's bad. Bad, bad, bad.
From a maintenance perspective, so you're going to get those mealworms from your supplier. You're going to feed off what you need to, put them in containers, and ideally, those mealworms are going to be fine for a while because they've been well taken care of before they got to you. So depending on your supplier, right, like check how they deal with those mealworms. What I do is they're hydrated before they head out. They've got a little bit of hydration in that travel. I don't include feed in with the mealworms when I ship them because that creates more frass for you to deal with when you're unpacking it, and it's real tiny and fine. I don't need that spreading around. I wouldn't want to deal with that if I was a courier. So the no bran in it, and just a little bit of hydration, right? You want a little bit for the travels, but not a ton. And so once you receive those, if you're going to feed those off within 2 weeks from me, just throw them in the fridge. You don't have to touch them. Take them out when you're ready to feed them. Within about 15 minutes, they'll be, like after you take them out of the fridge, within about 15 minutes, they'll be warmed up, moving around, crawling all over, active, ready to be fed off. If you're gonna order a crazy amount like Wally and you're gonna stretch that out over a while, what I would recommend is get them into the fridge, let them be, and every 1 to 2 weeks, pull them out of the fridge, give them a hydration source. Give them potatoes, give them carrots, cut them up and put them in that container and let them eat that for 2 to 3 hours. Just let them go to town. They'll warm up, they'll start consuming it, let them eat. After that 2 to 3 hours, after the 4 to 5 hours, depending on what your schedule is, 2 to 3 is perfectly fine. They get what they need. Take out anything that's left. So don't leave the carrots in there, don't leave the potatoes in there. Take that out, because once you put them back in the fridge, they're not going to consume that as fast. And then it turns into, okay, well now I've got something in the fridge that's food that I have to maintain. So just take the time to remove anything out that hasn't been eaten, and then put them back in the fridge, and they're good for another 1 to 2 weeks. You will start to see some pupation, right? It's stressful, so you're cooling them down, you're warming them up, you're cooling them down. So a little bit of pupation will happen, but it will dramatically reduce the amount of pupation. Yep. And a human fridge is around 40 to 42 Fahrenheit, I believe. Don't put them in the back where, for my particular fridge anyway, don't put them in the back where it tells you, hey, don't put stuff here or it will freeze, because you will freeze your mealworms, right? So location in the fridge needs to be appropriate. And honestly, anything under, I mentioned the cool room earlier on. I keep that cool room at about 48 to 49 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little bit higher in temperature, and they still are going to you're going to dramatically slow down, right? So if you have a fridge downstairs, or if you have a cool area that is around 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, they will dramatically slow down and be able to be stored for far longer.
Spot on. And that point about the back of your refrigerator, you do that one time and it's like, what the heck? Why did that happen?
Yep.
They're all frozen, and you never do it again.
Yep.
I'm going to add a couple of points from our experience over the years. I've done there was a period where I was doing the take them out every couple of weeks and then put them back and feed them, let them sit out for six hours or so and put them back in. I didn't really find that much of a difference as far as when I finally used them, finding more dead than if I just left them in for 4 to 5 weeks. So I just stopped doing that. I'll be very, very honest. I very rarely find any dead mealworms once they go into the fridge. That was my concern in the beginning, that, oh my gosh, I'm going to get a 10 or 20% die off, but very, very few will die. Here's another thing that I changed up after a while. After I did have some dying, your point about moisture is so important. If you even see a little bit of moisture, it's out, and I mean little tiny, a couple of droplets. It's like, okay, I'm done with that. I pull it out, I warm them up, and I probably will use them right away. That'll be my first in rotation. Here's how I try to, and it feels like this is working for me. I'm not an expert, but here's a tip that I could share with our viewers here is that in the last few years, what I've been doing is I'll take 1,000 2,000 mealworms in each container, and that, to your point, will be just a half inch or so. Maybe stack them up two or three
Hmm.
deep. But then I'll put wheat bran on top of that. Do they eat it? I don't think they do, and not all of it. Never, ever,
Very
ever all of it.
slowly. Yeah.
I think that's going to absorb some of the moisture. Another thing that I do is I'll take the newspaper that you send them in, and I'll tear it off, into like half
Mhm.
sheets or quarter sheets, whatever fits in the top of the container, and I'll put that in. Maybe I'll wad it up, or maybe I'll just shove it in as best as I can, and then put the top on. Tops, ventilation, little, quarter-inch holes, and then take the bags that you send. They're almost like cheesecloth, and cut them up and hot glue that on top of the holes that you make
Yep.
in the container. But I think that bran, and I think that newspaper, and I've pulled out the newspaper at times and it's been a little bit damp, and I think that saves the mealworms from having that
Yep.
accumulate at the bottom and kind of drowns them.
Yep. And the benefit with the newsprint or the newspaper is with the brand being in there, if life happens, people get busy. If you put in too much of that and they consume that brand, it turns into frass at the bottom, and then that becomes a problem in a scenario where those mealworms are not moving around. The frass will absorb that moisture then. It creates kind of a gunky, gross mess because the frass will it's not going to ferment in your fridge. It's not going to go crazy, but it's going to be a scenario where it just continues to cause problems. And so the newspaper or the blank newsprint from the bags that I ship out use that in there to absorb it, and they're less likely to try to consume that than the bran itself, and so there'll be less frass production.
Good, good point. Because and the brand that I put in, the wheat brand that I put in is light, very, very light.
Right.
It's just enough to make me feel comfortable. I don't know if that's the secret or not, but makes me feel comfortable. But I don't get that quicksand of frass build up
Right.
at the bottom where
Yep.
I take the mealworms out and they all look good, but then there's about 100 down in that pudding
Yep.
that are dead
Yep.
straight up. So great point. Really, really good point.
The lid is optional, right? So if you're in a scenario where you're the only one who's dealing with them in that fridge, you don't have to have that lid. I actually store them before I had the cool room. I was using just a standard fridge set at about 47 degrees Fahrenheit, and I would literally put my trays that I raised them in with the mealworms in it right in there and stack them up, right? So there was no lid, no containment. Same thing with the cool room now. I'm just rolling stacks of trays in there with mealworms to slow them down and keep them cool, so that I can manage the inventory that's available for you guys to grab, and then kind of keep them stable up until the Monday that they need to ship. So lids are only a comfort thing, I would
What?
say, right?
Yeah,
If you've got your partner there with you and they don't want to be seeing mealworms, get an opaque container and get a lid on there, and do what we've described. It'll work great.
it only takes one mealworm in her Caesar salad for this process
Yep.
to end immediately.
Yep.
I'm trying to think, Justin, of anything else we can share, anything else that you have here. I've got a couple more questions here, but anything else from a practical reptile keeper mealworm information that we could share for everybody at this point? I've exhausted my questions, so
I would say that for the keepers, you guys are familiar with the ups and downs, right? So as you're raising these animals, as you're taking care of these animals, you're going to have successes, you're going to have failures, you're going to have things you need to adjust. Um, that same mindset goes for these mealworms, right? The way that you address them and tackle them shouldn't be the way that Wally does it, shouldn't be the way that I do it. It needs to morph based on this into what works best for you. And that's the biggest thing I've realized over the last few years is that best is relative to your situation,
yes.
right? Like it's probably not your ideal dream scenario to go into your room every day and deal with your reptiles with a full face respirator on. If that was part of the gig, you may not do it, right? I literally do that 5 to 7 days a week, depending on what's going on, and it doesn't bother me. It fits me, right? And so be aware that what we're doing isn't going to be exactly what you need to do. Just to take what happens and roll with those issues and reach out and ask questions of like, hey, I tried what you guys said on that video, and this is what happened.
You
And
were so wrong.
right, usually what I do is say, okay, well, what's your situation? What'd you do? And I'll find that it's some interesting thing that I never would have thought of that somebody would do. And then, okay, well, how do we address that? How do we figure out a way to make it work with that interesting variable? And I mentioned opaque containers. Like I have clear containers that I was putting them in because mealworms don't bother me. And so I recommend that here's how you can buy more mealworms, right? Like from my perspective as a salesperson, you buying more at a lower price isn't like, why would I incentivize that? Well, because it's better for you.
Yes.
And I'm in it for the long haul here. So somebody said, well, I can't do that because my partner won't want to see mealworms. I'm like, okay, well, how do I solve that? Get a container you can't see them in, right? Like it could be something very simple, but I love those little nuances that you're not going to think of in a million years, and then trying to figure out like that's a little dopamine hit for me that I enjoy. So challenge it, and hey, this won't work because of, and we'll see what we can figure out.
I watch a million videos, not a day, but I watch a lot of videos. And okay, somebody's going to be talking about breeding crested geckos. I've done this for 25 years. Why would I watch a video on breeding crested geckos? Because I'm watching behind the scenes and I'm looking at, oh
Yep.
my gosh, he has a picture of isopods up. Oh, he's got this container. What is he using that container for? Oh, he's got a misting system, and he's so it's like you said, it's
Right.
finding these little, and then, hey, Joe, I see in the background that you're doing this. Why are you doing that? What's the benefit? Yes, yes. Keep this open, folks. Keep this communication open. Justin's always answering questions. I'm always answering questions. Absolutely. That's the best way to learn and to fix your process
Right.
and make it more practical for you and more efficient.
The
Absolutely.
the last thing I want to plug is from a safety perspective. So we've mentioned it a few times, and I'm gonna throw it out there: the allergies and the need to be mindful of what's going on there.
Yes.
I'll preface this by saying this. Sometimes I come off as sounding like you shouldn't raise mealworms. Don't do it. Just buy from me. Um, my personal experience has been that the insect frass can cause and trigger so many different issues, that it's not just me saying it. What will happen is any insect frass can trigger an allergic reaction on your skin, on your eyes, in your lungs. It's not something to take lightly. In the videos that you see me doing work in the farm, I have a full face respirator on. I am protecting my eyes from styes. I'm protecting my lungs from collapsing from my allergy-induced asthma from the frass itself. What's really cool about mealworms is that their frass particle is sized differently based on the age of the mealworm and the size of the mealworm. And so those very baby mealworms are laying frass, expelling frass that is very dusty and gets in the air, right? And so you want to be very mindful of that. If you're raising your own mealworms, take the appropriate precautions. Full face respirators are sometimes not an option for people. And so, wear a face mask at least to protect your lungs. And then do it somewhere where you're not in a closed room, right? Like imagine spray painting. Would you spray paint in a closed room? No, you're going to well ventilated, do it outside. Well, it's negative 10 degrees outside. Okay, is this really an appropriate thing for you to do? Because long term, even people who don't have allergic reactions now, by exposure and frequency, you will get them. So I'm an admin of a Facebook group that we constantly see. It's for mealworm keepers. We constantly see folks who will come in and join, and their first post is, "I've been raising mealworms for a few months, and I have this really bad cough. What is it? The
Oh,
mealworms?" And it happens consistently enough that It's an exposure and frequency thing. And so while you're attempting to, keep things progressing for your reptiles, keep things cost effective so you can keep doing what you love to do, you need to be mindful that that insect frass, the mealworm frass, is an allergen, and you need to take appropriate precautions. The other thing I've noticed is that mealworm frass it's very dusty, right? When it gets on me, if I am sweaty, right? I mentioned I try to keep it at 79 when we're working because that's a good temp for us to work at. When I get sweaty and it gets on me, I will have hives and allergic reactions. So it's not just the face that is an issue here, it's everything. And so you want to be mindful and careful of how you manage your insects and how you process them. Sifting the frass out is one of the things you just have to do because it's going to build up, and it needs to be taken care of. But make sure you've got a mask on. Do it in a well ventilated area. I am not a proponent of raising mealworms indoors where humans are living. And that's not because I want you to buy my mealworms. It's because I lived it myself, and it happened. I had allergy-induced asthma before mealworms, and so as soon as I started tinkering with them outside of 3 trays and I had more volume, it really started to impact me. And so be mindful of that when you start thinking about taking care of your own mealworms, or if you're having a persistent cough or eye irritation or something, it's highly likely that the frass from those mealworms is getting to you.
And it's not something that, new keepers, you're going to, oh, I'm going to work with mealworms and my hands are itchy and I have some respiratory issues. It's something that could go for months and months. And this is fine. I had a real quick story. I had a real close friend doing leopard geckos about 15 years ago. Took the trip to the airport, got the mealworms. He had to get them, flown in,
Yep.
and because he was out in the county. And the 45-minute trip back to his house, he started coughing up blood and almost couldn't breathe. Got him to the hospital, the shots and everything. It was that one time that he started reacting and reacted really terribly bad. That thank goodness everything was okay. But he gave up the hobby because he didn't want to go through that and ever again. I'm going to throw in this. I don't have a link to your Darth Vader mask, but what I do have is a link to a very simple mask that I wear because I'm really bad with dubias. Now, Justin yells at me every single time he sees me working with mealworms because I don't wear a mask, and I should, and I really should, folks. But I'm really bad with dubias, and I do wear a mask, and it is the different. I can't go downstairs if Nanette has worked with the dubias, brought them out and cleaned or fed or anything. I can feel that immediately once I get down to the bottom of the steps.
Yep.
When I can now wear this mask and I can clean and work with the frass, and my hands itch a little tiny bit, but from a respiratory standpoint, this mask is a game changer. So I'll put that link in the video description as well.
And
Highly recommend it. Thank you for bringing that up. That was one of my notes.
And
Can
this
you read that? Allergies.
It'll be one of those things that we'll get comments from folks that say, I've raised mealworms and insects for a decade and I don't have this issue. And I think that's great. I'm happy for you. I really am. I would equate it to teeth, right? Everybody has teeth. Everybody can relate to this. Some people have great teeth and don't have cavities, and some people just have cavities out the wazoo, right? Everybody's built different, right? And so I'm happy that there are people out there that don't have this, but don't go into this assuming that that's going to be you, because you could get several months into it and then develop these things, and then they're there forever. So be mindful of that. Have a backup plan, right? Like if your goal is to try to produce your own, do that in a scenario that doesn't involve, a human residence, right? Because all of our air, it's the way that our homes are built here in the U.S., it's circulating into everywhere. So having an external area, even a garage potentially, just depending on what your setup is. Again, if you've got a situation you're not sure of, ask questions and we'll throw out some options. But take it seriously, similar to how you would do something for your reptiles, right? Apply that to the mealworms as well.
Perfect. I've kept you here long enough, and I don't know, if you can see, but with this sweatshirt and it's 98 degrees in this room, I'm sweating like a cow here. So, um, question, you mentioned questions. I'll throw your links in the description. Please, folks, visit, like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you can with Justin's videos because they're so informative and they apply not just to me buying mealworms right now. They apply to the mealworm process. They apply to a business process. They apply to life in general. So I love watching his videos. Kept mealworms for years, but I'll watch every single one of his videos. I don't comment as much as I should. I apologize. Um, but love his videos. But Justin, can you kind of give folks a way that they can find you, and also talk a little bit about you run special promotions with
Mhm.
Midwest Mealworms occasionally. How can people get on that list because they need to be on your list?
Yep. Yeah. Simplest way is MidwestMealworms.com. You'll get a nice pop up that says, "Do you want to join the newsletter?" That's where all the deals and specials that are the best ones go out. So every now and then I'll throw something out if something's going on. But every week I do send out a newsletter. I try to stick to once a week. The only time I have not done once a week is where I messed up the discount code or I put the wrong link in or something, right? I'm human, I make an error. But I don't like getting a lot of email, and so I don't want to send a lot. So it's a once a week, every Wednesday. And I also utilize that as an inventory update. So one of the things that happens from a small business perspective is I may not have inventory available. Right now is a busy season, and so once they go, they go. And so joining the newsletter, you'll be the first one to know when inventory is
Yes.
available,
Yes.
but you'll also get any of the specials. And so those specials over the last month alone have been buy one, get one 30% off large mealworms, 50% off beetles. Honestly, it just kind of depends on how they're growing and hatching and what's going on as to what the deals are. But that's the place to get the best ones is that newsletter. Um, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Those are the primary ones I join. Facebook, I've gotten less vocal on from a messaging perspective. So I do have a Google Voice number in there if something happens and you need to reach out directly. But I'm always the one on the other side. So I do have a couple part-timers that help me in the farm, but anytime you reach out on any of those, it's going to be me on the other end that will help and respond.
Um, so we're opposites as far as messaging. So, I'm on Facebook all day. If I'm downstairs and I'm listening to something and I hear that diddling, I'm
Yep.
jumping on my phone because I have to answer it right now. Oh, I think I just messaged somebody. Sorry about that. And Justin's just the opposite. He'll send text messages. So I'll look at my phone. It's like, it's a flipping text message. And I have to answer Justin. And it's not that bad.
What I found happening is exactly what you described. I was getting so many dings that it would,
Yes.
instead of hydrating, I would be answering, and it just it wasn't I got to the production volume point where I couldn't do that anymore,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
I had to make a slight change. And that's also part of the reason why the videos slowed down a bit, is because it just got really busy. And
That's a
so
good thing.
things change, seasons change, and it's a good problem to have. And it's just motivation to get those processes cleaned up a little bit to get the time back to be able to do that fun stuff again.
It will never happen. That time will go somewhere else. It never happens. Um, my board, I still have the same points of to-dos and in my Notion as I did, 4 months ago. Now, I've cleaned some of it up.
Yep.
We talked about, I want to finish off on one statement here.
Okay.
You talked about the discounts, you talked about the beetle discounts. Folks, if you don't want to start with 100 mealworms to start your own colony or 1,000 mealworms or whatever, and then wait what did you say, 48 months? No, you didn't say 48 months. You said
For me, it's 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months. Sorry, folks, 2 to 3 months. If you don't want to wait that 2 to 3 months for those to go through the process, the life
Beetles!
cycle, go out to Justin's site, Midwest Mealworms, and buy beetles. I did that recently. I went through a process where I was I used up too many of my spare mealworms because I had a couple of bad shipments come in. another story. But anyways, bad shipment, son of a gun. And I'm using up my spare mealworms. I'm down to nothing. I've got to have something and I have to rebuild. And so went to Justin and said, hey, got to have some mealworms. Sent right away. But also, hey, Justin, can you send, 500 or I don't know, remember 1,000 beetles? And I got my colonies, my spare colonies going like right today. They were going. So, mealworms, beetles, black soldier fly. What am I missing? What else do you sell on your site?
The mealworm frass. So for those of you
Yeah.
that are raising your own mealworms or getting mealworms, the mealworm frass is a fantastic soil amendment. So if you're a mealworm keeper and a gardener, mealworm frass is pretty awesome. I've had full analysis done on that. So if you go to midwestmealworms.com/frass, I've got all of the NPK, all the macro stuff there, chitin content. So you mentioned chitin earlier on. The chitin is an interesting scenario, but the chitin percentage is out there. And if there's any information there that you want to see that you can't or that you don't, just let me know. I'll get it tested. I've got arsenic and lead levels out there. They're not there. And so it's a very good clean soil amendment. That's available on the website as well. But as you're working your mealworm colony, take that frass and utilize that in an appropriate and safe way. Don't take it in your house and throw it around because it's dusty, right? But if you go to that link that I mentioned, you can see different ways to make a compost tea. You can top dress it on your garden outside.
Yes.
Utilize that mealworm frass because they're not only good protein sources for your reptiles, but that soil amendment is really good for your plants as well. So that's out on the web.
Our orchids love it. Not that I'm keeping a ton of orchids, but the orchids that I'm keeping love it. I'll
Yep.
put it in the plants. We have bioactive in several of our enclosures, and I'll use it as a fertilizer for the plants in our bioactives because it's kind of natural.
Yep.
For me, it feels natural rather than going out to Stein's Gardens and Gifts and buying, I don't know who it is, their fertilizer. It just feels very natural, and the plants take off. It's really, really a plus for me.
Yep. It's good stuff.
Good call. Good call. I want to talk to you about the frass after the show here. I've got a thought,
You
but
got
I will finish up and say this has been not just a pleasure, not just an honor. This is a lot of time out of your operations for you to take to help us understand mealworms from both a keeper, standpoint, but also from a manufacturing production kind of standpoint. For you to share, hey, folks, this is how you can keep and raise and breed mealworms is against a business plan for a mealworm breeder seller. So I want people to kind of realize that that's the kind of the person that you are, and in the hobby, in the community, it's greatly appreciated. And thank you very much for doing this for us.
My pleasure. Thank you for everything that you do as well. Looking forward to 12 Days of Christmas.
Our pleasure entirely. It's a blessing. So we're looking forward to it too. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thanks all.